Welcome everybody. My name is Anna-Kaisa Kultima and this is Games Now. Games Now is an open lecture series on the hot topics of game industry, live streamed from Otaniemi, Helsinki, Aalto University. This lecture series is a collection of new topics or emerging trends, and today's topic is definitely one of those that I can't explain to you myself. So we have an expert on the topic of blockchain gaming today speaking. If you want to take the full advantage of the lecture series, just follow our social media channels on YouTube and Facebook. Follow and subscribe, and the recordings will be coming to YouTube to you to check also later. If you have any questions for today's lecturer, please post them on the stream and we'll pick it up for you to enjoy at the end of the lecture. If you're here present, you can use the mic also at the end of the lecture to ask more questions. So without further ado, our expert today is Jon Jordan. So welcome, take the stage and tell us a little bit about this topic of blockchain gaming. Thank you. Welcome.
So yes, thank you very much. Good to see you all here today. It's always dangerous when you're called an expert, I think, especially if you're, like me, a journalist. While I think I've spent the last few months looking at blockchain games in quite a lot of detail, I launched a website called blockchaingamer.biz, where I currently still work and also do some consulting as well now. But I'm still very much a journalist, so I'm not a blockchain expert. I will, I think, give an overview of kind of blockchain technology as much as we need to go through this talk, and then delve quite heavily into blockchain games as they are at the moment. So it's good to see that some of you did your homework and you looked at some games, blockchain games, before this talk, and I got some questions back, some feedback, so that was good to see, and I'm going to pick some of them out because I think it was quite interesting before we start. So some descriptions of blockchain games: cash grab, capitalism simulators, hoax. So a bit of a sceptical market, sceptical audience here. Slot machines and gambling. There's no innovation. Actually, I don't disagree with those sentiments. Certainly, I think in the history of blockchain games, even though really blockchain games probably have only been going for about a year, we've seen some of those tendencies. I think hopefully now we're not seeing those. I really like this one: the absurd power of hype contained with economic potential. And that really, I think, to me, kind of described what the blockchain game sector has been, particularly as we look back at 2017 and the kind of the cryptocurrency bubble, speculative bubble, in terms of how expensive the value of Bitcoin got. But yeah, that is part of blockchain, I have to say. And economic potential is definitely something when it comes to the game space that blockchain does very well. This one I liked as well. It's just a technology, so kind of calm down, everyone. It's not anything different. It's just a technology, and as we'll kind of see, blockchain isn't magical. It's effectively a way of organising databases in a new way that has some interesting characteristics, but it's not a magic bullet. Another one I was kind of less sure about was this is all about possessing things, which is not about enjoyment, and that's something I'll probably kind of argue against in this talk. I think kind of possession is something that's very human, whether it's physical items or digital items. Over the last 10 years, we've really come to understand how people can care very much about digital items, even ones they can't sell on. Obviously, in blockchain, there is this kind of interesting idea that you can own digital items and then you own them properly and you can sell them on. And then kind of another one, the game part seemed a bit boring. That could be a fundamental part of what blockchain games are, in a way that we'll talk a little bit about. It's probably the case with free-to-play mobile games, so my history I'll go into it in a little bit of detail. But I've focused for the last 10 years really on free-to-play mobile games, and those have a very sceptical audience. Some of you may not like free-to-play mobile games. Certainly some game designers really dislike free-to-play mobile games. And the game part in a lot of free-to-play mobile games seems a bit boring. So before we start, I would definitely say blockchain I think is going to revolutionise the games industry, but in maybe some quite subtle ways at the beginning. You know, the games industry is not broken. Blockchain is not going to fix it. You know, there would be no point to put Call of Duty on the blockchain. That would just be bonkers, you know. So we shouldn't really be comparing blockchain games with the current kind of paradigm of games that we have, because those games work really well. We love them. There's big blockbusters, there's little indie hits, there's pretty much a game for any audience. blockchain is going to be a new sort of gaming, so I think kind of bear that in mind as we go through. Okay, so me. Let's get rid of that. So my name's Jon Jordan. I've been a games journalist now for over 20 years, getting on for 20 years. Started out on a magazine called Edge, which is still going, doing the usual kind of PC console kind of coverage. Over the kind of next 10 years, my focus really moved away from games per se, more to talking to developers about why are you making this game, what technology are you using, and really focusing actually quite heavily on the kind of financial and business aspects of games. So really my history is as a business journalist writing about the game space. But 12 years ago, I co-founded a company called Steel Media, which is best known for Pocket Gamer. So various Pocket Gamer websites, and Pocket Gamer Connects as a conference that we have in Helsinki every year now. And as part of that, I was kind of in the saw how the free-to-play mobile industry kind of not only revolutionised mobile games. So obviously there were mobile games before free-to-play. There was Angry Birds, obviously the most successful mobile game at the time, and then free-to-play came in. But free-to-play revolutionised the games industry. So free-to-play went from basically, or mobile games went from $0 billion a year very quickly, kind of 6 or 7 years, to now $50 billion of annualised revenue. That's basically half the whole game space. So I think, as I say, the games industry can be disrupted, but often it's kind of new types of games coming in. So I predict blockchain is the next great disruption, 80% likelihood, slightly plucked out of thin air, but I do think it will happen. I think there's lots of business reasons why it will happen. I think there's lots of psychological reasons for individual gamers why it will happen. But it's not. I don't think it's guaranteed. I think we've seen stuff like VR, certainly a very different technology, but some really interesting games with VR. It's really interesting technology, but at the moment hasn't caught on. Partly because you have to buy the hardware, and at the moment people don't see the benefit of spending $500 or whatever on a VR headset. Here's my email here. I'll have other social things to put at the end. If you want to contact me, feel free, and I'll put this slide deck up on LinkedIn, so if you want to find me on LinkedIn, you can get the slide deck. Okay, so I'm not going to go too heavily into this, because I say I am not an expert in blockchain, and the more I talk to people who are experts in blockchain, the more I realise how little I know. But I think we need to kind of have some sort of framing in terms of what a blockchain is before we can talk about blockchain games. So, blockchain is basically a database as a way of organising information. So at the moment we have generally kind of centralised systems, so certainly most games are running on a kind of centralised server, so we have kind of some sort of node here where all the data is stored. If data is stored in that node, it is the authoritative centre, and that's that computer says this is what the data is, and then these other computers connect to it, and that's how the database is formed. Obviously, if this central server goes down for any reason, if the game company goes bust and switches the server off, then there is no game anymore. We have a kind of a more decentralised view here. It's still not fully decentralised, so there are still some kind of nodes here which have more, say, authority. When we talk about blockchain is a very dangerous term to use, really, as I'm told. Often people talk about these distributed ledgers. So certainly Bitcoin is a kind of more distributed ledger system. Actually, does anyone actually own any Bitcoin in the audience? Always good to get an idea. Any Bitcoin holders? Come on. Don't be shy. One. Okay. Anyone Ethereum? A bit more useful for gaming? Or one Ethereum there? Good. They will say that the people who are really into cryptocurrency are people from countries who don't trust their banking system. So you Finns are very trustworthy with a good government. So probably why you're not so much into Bitcoin. Anyone own a Cryptokitty? That's always the killer question. No Cryptokitty owners. Oh, well, you're going to learn something today. Okay. Anyway, so distributed ledgers. When it comes to Bitcoin is obviously a financial blockchain. And what's happening here is all these nodes are all connected to each other. So there is no kind of individual sense of kind of an authority kind of node, or authority is created by what we call consensus. So basically these nodes work out amongst themselves what is the right information to be storing. You can see here there's different types. So in this one it's anonymous users, and this one it's not anonymous. There's different levels of kind of privacy you have with blockchains. Okay. In terms of kind of the block bit of it, so it's a linear process. So we kind of start off with a block, and then other blocks are kind of added to that. This is, as I say, there's lots of different ways of describing this. This is kind of a classic kind of Bitcoin type blockchain. I'll go into a bit of detail on that. But some of the interesting things here is, so the information is stored in a block, and the information in a new block has to agree with the information that's been stored previously. So you can't suddenly have some information in here that doesn't agree with what's here. So in terms of a distributed ledger, that basically is a kind of a financial banking system. So assume we all have a Bitcoin wallet, and the distributed ledger goes, who owns how many Bitcoin? So say I have 100 Bitcoin and I send you 10 Bitcoin, then the transaction is I only have 90 now and you have 10 extra to what you had. That's the information that goes into the block. Basically these computers work out that that's the correct information, and that doesn't disagree with anything here in the block. So that doesn't, if I had 1,000 Bitcoin in the previous block and now I've only got 100 and I haven't sent any to anyone else, that would go, that information is wrong, I should actually have 1,000, not 100. So the consensus is worked out, and then this block is then added to this line of blocks, and then it kind of continues on. So how does a Bitcoin blockchain work? So why is it called kind of a crypto currency? So there's a very complicated mathematical equation that all these computers are trying to solve. It's a kind of cryptographic puzzle. You have these computers, they're all trying to solve it, and when one of them thinks it's solved it, it basically says to all the other computers, all the other nodes in this system, I've solved that block. They all go and check that that is correct, and then the computer, or the pool of computers that have solved that block, then get the rewards, in this case Bitcoin. And then once the block has been completed, all the information, all the transactions that have been made during that period of time, for Bitcoin it's about 10 minutes, are then saved, and then the next block happens. So that's called a proof of work system. We'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, an interesting thing about blockchain is privacy. So there's different levels of privacy, but it is quite fascinating. It's actually taken me quite a long time to kind of get to grips with this a little bit. But this is when I was doing this talk last week. You just Google, what's the Bitcoin wallet with the most amount of Bitcoin in it, and we can just see what it is. It's all very open. You can look at all the Bitcoin wallets in the world. You can look at distributions of how much Bitcoin is in there. So this is the address. It's just a string of numbers and letters. But what we can see here is it has 168,791.36 and a few other digits. So that's how many Bitcoin are in there. Bitcoin has an 8 decimal place system, and then because all blockchain tokens of Bitcoin is just a token that runs the system, can be exchanged out for fiat currency, in this case dollars, we can see what that balance is. So the balance of the biggest Bitcoin wallet is over $1 billion. Obviously that changes all the time because the price of Bitcoin changes all the time. So that's pretty impressive. If you had a bank account with $1 billion in, the bank would want to know who that person is. And if that person wanted to send $1 billion from that account to someone else, the bank would want to know who they are, why they're sending it, and who they're sending it to. With Bitcoin, none of this happens. We don't know who this person, who this wallet belongs to. We know it's on Binance, which is one of the big exchanges. Actually, some other interesting information. We can see when it was first created. So this is the 8th of December last year, when Bitcoin values were at their highest. You can actually see how much has been received. Oh, my clicker's gone. So we can see 170,000 Bitcoin have been received. We can see it's been sent that amount, and we can kind of see the last activity. So a certain amount of kind of information, quite interesting, but we don't actually know who the individual is. The other interesting thing about these kind of blockchains, Bitcoin certainly as a currency, is you could literally send, the person who owns this could send all that money to another wallet without any problem. That's just what the system is designed for. They could do that because they wanted to do it. They could do it by mistake. If they did it by mistake, it wouldn't be like a bank transaction where you kind of go, oh, sorry, I made a mistake, can I get that money back? If that money is sent, then it's gone. This is kind of one of the problems for user experience and certainly accessibility for gamers. You don't really want to have this system for people who are playing games and maybe don't really understand what they're doing and could be sending money or items to each other, not really realizing what they're doing, and they can't get it back. Even more kind of radical is, we'll go into a little bit about wallets. I'm not going to go too much into it, but effectively you have a password and then some 12 words as your kind of backup password to get access to your wallet. If you lose those, that's it. No one can get them back if for whatever reason. So if the person who owns this loses their password and their backup phrase, basically they've lost $1 billion. Again, this is some people love this because it means they own it, and there's a certain kind of libertarian type of person who likes this kind of stuff. Obviously, for most people in the world, that's pretty scary. So we need to bear that in mind. Okay, so what's blockchain actually used for? So it's a decentralized system. There's no single authority. The computers kind of amongst themselves work out what data they're storing due to some kind of internal logic. You can only add new information, and the information that's in there can't be changed. And there's some degree of transparency. So those are kind of the key things of a blockchain. So I didn't create this. This is just something off the internet, but we can see there's a lot of use cases for blockchain, even though it's a fairly boring database system to some degree. Now, obviously, kind of financial transactions are still the biggest use for blockchain, partly because Bitcoin is still the biggest blockchain. But there's lots of other things that it could be used for. So we have some ideas about things about identity. So it could be useful for governments to store ID on a system that is not obviously transparent to everyone, but you would want to check if your details were correct. And then certain government organisations would want access to that as well. We can come see how that would work. Another case is healthcare. So obviously, if you have your health records, they're very personal. They need to be secure, but you want to know that they're correct. And equally, if you're rushed to A&E, you're unconscious. They might want to know your blood type, if you're allergic to penicillin, all those kind of things that could be stored in a in a database. A bit more interesting, we have kind of things around supply chain. So that's basically how things are made. This could be really important for kind of health as well. So kind of for creating drugs, where were the drugs made? What were the ingredients that went into the drugs? Where did they come from? What's the dose of the drug? Is it has it been checked? Similarly, you could think about things like voting. Again, obviously, in Finland, not particularly a lot of problems, I guess, around democracy, but in some places in the world, once someone's voted, you could have all the votes on a blockchain, and then that would kind of at least say once the votes had been cast that they hadn't been kind of changed. Other things, supply chain, so aviation up here. Obviously some very critical, mission critical kind of components, so were they made with the right titanium? There's certainly been issues in aviation about people putting in kind of cheaper components and that causing problems as well. And even stuff like kind of the automobile industry is doing quite a lot of work around using blockchain to say how was the car made, what were the components in it, what's the life cycle of the car, what components have been changed. That could be pretty useful. So what's interesting though, from our point of view, talking about games, which I haven't done a lot of yet, is games are not here. So this people have put together all these different uses of blockchain. There's obviously lots of other ones I haven't really mentioned, but games are not here. So it's not clear to people outside the games industry that games are like a primary good example for blockchain, which is I kind of agree with to some extent. But as we all know, game developers love to mess around with new technology. So that's kind of what's happened is a certain type of game developer, kind of coders mainly, kind of really got into cryptocurrency when it first came out a few years ago, and they've started messing around to make games. So we're not really yet seeing a lot of established game developers getting into blockchain, although that's starting to happen. But up to this point, we haven't really seen that. It's been more kind of hobbyists. So that gives a kind of a reason why we've kind of seen the games that we've seen, I think. Okay, very quickly, there are loads of blockchains out there. It's basically a blockchain for every kind of single use case that we saw in the previous example. This is just the top 10 by capitalization. So as I kind of said before, every blockchain has a token. That token can be exchanged out for real money. That is a fundamental part of a blockchain. Personally, I think we talk too much about the value of the tokens when it comes to games already. But on top here we have Bitcoin. So this is the market capitalization of all the Bitcoin, so $113 billion. So looking at these top 10, there's two very obvious use cases. One is financial regulation, financial transactions, and one is building a kind of a broader blockchain which can be used for what we call distributed apps. So basically it's a blockchain with a kind of a code layer where people can build apps and games on top of it. So the biggest one of that is the number 2 here, Ethereum. So market cap 23 billion, quite a bit less than Bitcoin. So there are lots of problems with Ethereum, which we'll go into a little bit. The problem often with blockchains is how long it takes to close a block, how much information you can have in that block, how many transactions can be operated within a second. So there's lots of work being done within Ethereum to kind of solve that, and there are some other blockchains that kind of look to, I guess, kind of replace Ethereum. But at number 3 here we have Ripple. That's a financial blockchain. Gets a lot of stick from kind of true blockchain believers because it's not properly decentralized, they say, because it's coming out of the kind of traditional financial industry, and they want to have a particular setup. Then we have EOS, which is just launched, had some problems, but this positions itself as an Ethereum kind of killer in the sense that you can operate a much bigger scale on EOS, but it's not. It's only been running for a few months. There are some game projects looking at it. Nothing really live yet. Litecoin is a kind of historic, same kind of era as Bitcoin, about moving money around. These two here, Tron and Neo, again like EOS, are newer blockchains that game developers are looking at. Tron is very early. Neo is actually out of China. It's called sometimes called the Chinese Ethereum, and they've actually spending quite a lot of money about encouraging game developers in China to start developing on it. So I think they have 30 game developers that they're funding to some degree. Monero down here, number 8, is another financial blockchain. It's kind of interesting in the sense that we looked at that Bitcoin wallet. Monero is you don't get that level of transparency, so it's used for a lot of money laundering and other bad things. Bitcoin Cash is a version of Bitcoin. So another nice thing about blockchains is you can fork them, which basically means you take the code and you kind of create a new product out of it. So Bitcoin Cash is what they call a fork of Bitcoin. That kind of forking mechanism can be interesting for games. And down the bottom we have Cardino, which is again like an Ethereum, sort of Ethereum thing, a bit different. I won't go into detail. So those are just 10 of the biggest blockchains. Literally there are hundreds out there. And there are some people actually making game-specific blockchain technology, which we have to remember is just a database, just a certain type of database. Okay, so again, this is kind of a scary graph. I didn't put it together. You kind of tend to find that a lot of these blockchains get a bit kind of one-upmanship against each other. So this is actually put together by one here called MagnaChain, which is looking to present itself as a kind of contender. Some game companies are actually looking at it. Very quickly, thing to look at here is, I've mentioned consensus a little bit, so we have these different consensus mechanisms. Bitcoin and Ethereum both use this one called proof of work. This is this very heavy-duty trying to solve this cryptographic problem. That requires a lot of electricity. That's why we have kind of ecological concerns about how much electricity is being used to mine Bitcoin. Most of the Bitcoin mining happens in China, where electricity is cheaper. But that kind of consensus is actually fairly unsustainable. So most of these ones here, there's different versions of these, but these are now all moving to proof of stake, which is, I won't go into detail, it's worth looking at if you're interested in that, but it's a very different way of running a blockchain and doesn't involve this large amount of electricity. And actually Ethereum is moving away from this point of proof of work to proof of stake, or that's going to take a couple of years for that to kind of migrate over. So we mentioned blocks before. So Bitcoin, 10 minutes to close a block, Ethereum 15 seconds, so we can see the improvement there. A lot of these other new blockchains are looking to go kind of even faster than that. Obviously the faster you close your blocks, the kind of faster the system. More interesting than actual blocks are transactions per second. So at the moment Bitcoin can handle 7 transactions a second and closes its block roughly every 10 minutes. Ethereum can do 35 transactions per second. Obviously an improvement on Bitcoin, but not very useful if you're running a game with any scale at all. And so this is why you have this kind of situation where these new blockchains, so we have EOS here, Neo, are running in the thousands of transactions a second, which is kind of what you would need to run a game at scale. However, if you're running a blockchain game, you may not want to run a lot of the activity of the game, certainly the gameplay. You probably don't want to run it on a blockchain anyway, because you still have this kind of block time kind of issue to get around. So you wouldn't want to necessarily play a blockchain game where a turn-based game on the blockchain where you have to wait for a block to close for each turn, because that would be kind of crazy. Certainly on Bitcoin you'd be waiting 10 minutes for a turn. Even on Ethereum you'd be waiting 15 seconds, which for some turn-based games would be not fast enough. So we have this idea of scalability. Talk a little bit about this, and this is basically a way of having your cake and eating it when it comes to a blockchain. So you have the main blockchain for all the financial transactions and the ownership model. And then you have what people call side chains here, which are basically kind of cut down versions of a blockchain which don't have the same level of security but can operate much faster and have other nice scalability characteristics. Something else talked about a lot in the blockchain world is these smart contracts. So smart contracts are effectively little bits of code that run on top of the blockchain, and they are kind of, you can consider them kind of financial kind of macros. This is kind of useful for stuff like IP kind of situations. So in a sense, you're a game developer and you're going to sell your game on a blockchain platform. You might want to put in your smart contract, you might want to say, when a game sells for $10, I, the developer, get half of that, and then my outsourcing team, wherever they are in the Philippines, gets $1, and then my, I don't know, who else, I've taken a license from Warner Brothers, so they'll get a cut as well. And basically that can all be built automatically into what's called a smart contract. So when the money comes into that wallet, the smart contract kind of separates it all out. So it's pretty useful. And I think that's enough of that. Okay, so let's go into games. We've been boring you with blockchain stuff. This is what you came to hear, I guess. So this is something I put together a few months ago now, and as these things tend to be, is now horribly out of date because things move quite quickly in the world of blockchain, and my knowledge has got a bit better than when I did this originally. But this was an attempt when I first started writing about it. There's so many companies out there, there's easily over 200 blockchain game service companies and well over 500 game developers at some level. I mean, most of them are fairly small, but this is how I tried to put things together in my head to try and see what everyone was doing. So discussed a little bit about blockchain. So we have Ethereum here. The vast majority of these are currently operating on Ethereum. That's partly because most of these projects are not live to any great degree. There are issues with running on Ethereum in terms of the scalability. So some of these are now moving kind of over here to things like EOS and NEO that we've spoken about. Here in the middle is Bitcoin. This is all tends to be slightly older games. We're going to look at a couple of those just to see how the kind of industry started. But plenty going on here with this kind of game kind of category. And I guess when you looked at games, when you looked at the videos, these games are fairly limited. Now some of these games that are not coming out yet are pretty complex. So we're kind of seeing a kind of sea change in terms of the gameplay. Whenever I think about the blockchain game sector, I actually split it into two. So I think there's the games, blockchain games, and then there's the blockchain game services, which are kind of connected and link into some of the games, but also could link into games that don't run on the blockchain, so traditional games. And from a kind of a predictive point of view, I think the blockchain game service sector will kind of happen. I can't see why that wouldn't happen, because it's as I say, a new way of running a database which has great advantages. So I can't see why in 10 years' time EA and Activision Blizzard and Sega and all those people would not want to run some aspects of their games on the blockchain, because effectively it means that they own the bank. They have much more control over kind of currency and value and payment systems. So from that kind of boring infrastructure point of view, I can't see why that wouldn't happen. Whether we have this kind of blockchain game sector in 10 years' time, that's less clear. I guess we can look back to the internet. So the internet came along, and I guess we did have a category of internet-enabled games. That is what we called them. We obviously don't call them that anymore, because all games use the internet to some degree. So we could see that with blockchain games, and that the category is not really used because all games just use it to some degree. So anyway, what are these services? So we have platforms here. So I guess platforms are a way of gaining scale, so gaining users, and helping discovery. So I guess the only one that's live of these at the moment is BitGuild. So that has four blockchain games that are currently live. Nice thing about it is you log into BitGuild, and then you have access to those games. It uses the same currency. You have some very basic at the moment, but you have some community in there as well. So it's kind of an aggregation. We have this one here. This is Terra Virtua. This is trying to do a similar thing for VR games. So VR, as we all know, kind of hasn't reached the scale that perhaps we thought it would have done. So they're trying to kind of create a social VR environment, a typical kind of metaverse. There's some other kind of more interesting ones here. So this Play Table is actually a touchscreen console that's connected to the Ethereum blockchain, where you can play kind of card-based games, and you can have uses radio frequency items as well. We have this one over here. This is actually it was called Chimera. It's now called Zaya. That's actually a blockchain developed specifically for playing games. So probably shouldn't be in platform. Should be up there really, I suppose. Then we have tools. So Loom is the best known of these. This is looking at this kind of side chain technology. So this is a way of making blockchains faster and more scalable and more flexible. We have Aalto. There's quite a lot of work being done, and I'm going to talk quite a lot about items and the value of items and how that is something new, I think, for the games industry, the ownership of items. So Aalto is doing some tools so game developers can easily create items for their games that work on the blockchain, have a marketplace for them, and there's a very strong idea, although we haven't seen a great amount of evidence of it yet, of what we call item interoperability. So very basic, I own a sword in one game and I can take that sword to another game where it might be a sword or it might be a car, or obviously there's some pretty big issues around how you get that to work in a aesthetic manner and in a kind of a sensible manner. But that's quite powerful. Coming down here we have marketplaces and distribution, which are sort of the same thing. So some of these companies could be in either. I've tried to, in my own head, put them where I think they go, although in time they could do both. So marketplaces are pretty straightforward. We have items, game items that are on the blockchain, so swords, characters, cards, and you want to trade them. So the best known of these is called OpenSea. That's a browser-based marketplace where you can just see what items are on sale. If you want a better Cryptokitty or you want a better car in some of these games, you can go in and just buy them. Most of the blockchain games will have their own marketplace, but what's interesting and a kind of a characteristic of blockchain is that it is so open that you can have these kind of third-party marketplaces, which are a bit different to what we've seen in the past. So this one here, Wax, is a project from the OP Skins guys. So they were best known for running a Counter-Strike skins trading platform. That was a kind of secondary market. Valve never liked it, but it couldn't kind of boot them off for a long period of time. It actually did boot them off a couple of months ago, partly because they were building this new blockchain marketplace which allowed you to transfer things immediately, and Valve had put in a restriction, a cooldown period in terms of how quickly you could resell items. So we're kind of seeing some ideas from non-blockchain gaming space kind of come into this one. This is an interesting one here, Gamer Token. This is actually from some German PC game developers who are looking to retrospectively fit blockchain game items into existing games. So one of the big problems with blockchain games is there's very little scale at the moment. There's not many players, probably give or take 10,000, I would think, globally. If you're retrospectively fitting a blockchain item to a game with already millions of users, you're solving one of the big problems for blockchain games. So they're kind of interesting project to look at. Distribution down here, there's quite a lot going on here. This is slightly more straightforward, I suppose, in the sense it's bringing like a Steam type approach to the blockchain. So best known here are Robot Cache and Ultra. One of the ideas here is, instead of this kind of 70-30 split we've seen with Steam, these guys, Ultra, are offering a 85-15 split, so the developers get more of the money up front. The most interesting thing about these, though, is the resale of games. So the idea for these kind of platforms is you buy a license for a game, you play it, you decide you don't want it anymore, you resell it on the platform, you get some money back, the original developer gets some money as well. So much more flexibility in terms of kind of how PC games are distributed and resold. The few app stores, so AppCoins, Moo, and Alex, are doing mobile games. The biggest kind of the biggest categories here are community and esports. So community, there's quite a lot of different business models going on here. So we have kind of pure community. So Referium is an interesting project, has over 500,000 registered users, but it's mainly getting people to, well, historically it's mainly been getting people to watch Fortnite kind of streams, and so it's not really doing anything on the blockchain, but you can kind of watch these streams and you can kind of get in platform kind of currency. There's a few things here like Shard, which is looking at funding, and there's a few here, Line and Kin, which are more kind of social messaging kind of platforms. Interestingly, BitGuild up here, this platform, has just launched a mobile app, which is a chat app, to try and build community, and also they're giving away free tokens, so effectively it's kind of free money. So it's slightly an odd experience. You have to kind of keep tapping to see if you can get these kind of airdrops of tokens. I've managed to get 22 cents of airdropped Tron so far, so that was really exciting for me. So Theta over here is a video streaming platform, so peer-to-peer video streaming blockchain, focusing on game streaming. So esports is kind of most interesting, I think, at the moment in terms of finding adding something to the games industry. So say the games industry is not broken in most sectors of it. We all find plenty of games to play. There's never been more developers and games out there. Esports, I think, though, is a little bit broken. So as I see the esports market, loads of people watch esports. There's loads of interaction. There's loads of excitement around it. But as a business, it's been stuck about $1 billion of annual global revenue for a few years now. Now, the reason I think that's the case is that it's a very fragmented kind of business model. So if you're the developer of a big esports game, then it's fine. So obviously Riot Games very successful with League of Legends. Activision Blizzard spent a lot of time and money building up Overwatch as an esports brand. Valve with Dota 2. So those guys make money. As their games get more popular, people buy the games or buy items in the games. That's how they make their money. The people who make the most money, though, are the most successful esports teams. So obviously you have these big tournaments, these big kind of pots, and the top esports teams win that money. Where does that money then go? Well, it goes to the top esport players. So that money kind of comes out the ecosystem. It's a bit like kind of soccer, I guess. In the UK, we're very proud of the Premier League. It makes tons of money, but all the money goes to the footballers. You know, it's not a lot being recycled into grassroots. And this is kind of the problem with esports at the moment. Blockchain can help that, because the whole point of a blockchain system that works is it has a ecology, a kind of self-supporting ecology based on tokens and value. So even if you're a little esports team, you can still have your kind of people who donate to you, buy your merchandise, and it's all using the same token. It's all kind of cycled round and round, rather than the big guys just taking all the money. So I think there's a lot of potential here. This is why there's a lot of work going on in esports. Doesn't seem to be much. It's hard to pick out any winners at the moment, I have to say. But I think that's where a lot of work is going on. Okay, let's talk a bit more about the games, and that's really where I'm going to focus on now for the rest of the talk. So what's interesting for me as a writer, as a journalist about blockchain is the lack of discussion by most games companies. Now that may be because they think blockchain is a disaster and they don't want to break their existing business model. I don't think actually people in the games sector are stupid or don't like new technology. I think with blockchain they're very uncertain, partly because of some of the things we've seen in your comments about, is it a hoax, is it gambling, all these kind of things. But the one big company who are really into it are Ubisoft. Now that, I think, is mainly because the CEO, Yves Guillemot, is personally really into it. But they have some projects going on within Ubisoft, actually developing, or they have developed their own blockchain game, kind of a prototype really. I'm not sure it will ever come out. It's called Hashcraft. It's a pretty interesting game, very different sort of game to the other blockchain games we're seeing, very much based around community. But this is a slide that came from a game hackathon that Ubisoft put together a bit earlier on in the year, called Blockchain Game Heroes. And these are the kind of things that when it was kind of trying to promote that event, kind of what it looked at, or what blockchain could do. And I think it's actually a pretty good guide to where we're going, even if we're not there yet. So this idea of magical tokens. Let's talk a bit about tokens. We'll talk a bit more about tokens. What's interesting here is that players create value. So value, obviously, when it comes to Bitcoin, we all think about how much is Bitcoin worth in dollars. Did I get in early enough to retire? But value doesn't have to be financial. And for me, the real focus when I'm giving these talks, I give quite a lot of talks about blockchain now, is about non-financial value. How do we create non-financial value in blockchain games? So what if blockchain could create new ways of playing, thanks to its own properties? So this is kind of important. What is blockchain good at? As I say, sticking Call of Duty on blockchain, I mean, you couldn't do it anyway, but even if you could, you'd alienate all the audience. So what is a blockchain database system, what does that enable in games that we haven't seen before? From one world to the other, this is all about interoperability. So how can you move assets between games? And this is the one I like the most. A decentralized network, decisions approved by community, direct shares exchanges, blockchain gives full powers to the player community. This is the radical bit for me. It's a radical bit for game developers as well, because suddenly you don't have a game that you control. You don't have a game that if you switch the servers off, there's no game anymore. By definition, on a blockchain, you don't own the servers. The servers are just running in a decentralized manner. Actually, if your community doesn't like the way your game's going, they could fork your game, and just run it themselves, in which case it's certainly not your game anymore. But this is kind of interesting if we assume a more kind of friendly exchange between developers and community. You can build systems, although we've not seen very much of it yet. You can build systems where the community kind of helps you guide where the game's going. And this is something that's pretty different to what we've seen before. Obviously, game developers already have communities and community managers and try and get feedback from communities where the game's going. But this is a very different way of how that kind of power balance will run. This is a good one. This guy's not a game developer. He's part of the Ethereum Foundation. I don't agree with all this, but I think it's interesting to get our heads around what someone from the non-game space, so it's like a blockchain game expert, would want in a game. So it has to be a good game first. I mean, to me, that doesn't really mean anything. I don't, what is a good game? This is what I like. Explore what makes blockchain unique. So that clearly, if you're designing a blockchain game, you have to think about what is this doing that I can't do. We see a lot of games at the moment on the blockchain that don't need to be on the blockchain. But we're starting to see some games that couldn't be done any other way, which is interesting. So loads of limitations. How can we design around them? I mean, I guess that's the same for any design concept. There's always limitations. How do you design around them? So this persistent always-on world, more than that, it's a persistent always-on world that you, as the game developer, can't switch off. You don't have control over. And that's because the players own the game. So players, I think, have always owned game experiences. So you have these kind of very deep fan communities doing whatever they're doing around games. But this time they're in the game, and they're in the items, and they're in the experiences. So it's a handover of power. This one's tricky. Allow anyone to design and improve the game. I mean, that can happen because you have this idea of the community can fork the game, and if they have enough kind of good coders, they can kind of make their own game based on that. This is kind of the interesting one down here, bots. So certainly any kind of computer-based system that has financial gain attached to it is going to attract bots. We'll look at an example of this in blockchain. Whether you embrace bots, I guess, I mean, some games you can and some games you can't, but you have to be aware, certainly, if there's a way of making money, then someone will try and create a bot to make more of that money. So I think between Ubisoft and Alex van der Sand, we have some pretty interesting overviews of what we should be looking at. So this is the first blockchain game. Very exciting, isn't it? So 2014, this came out. This is called Hunter Coin, based on the Bitcoin blockchain. Worked in a very similar way, this kind of proof of work idea. And basically what happened was every time a block closed, the kind of computer that closed that block was rewarded in Hunter Coin in a similar way to Bitcoin. Then also a proportion of the Hunter Coin were thrown onto this map. So we can see here a little character. And so players, little character, they move around the map and they collect these Hunter Coins as they're kind of spawned onto the map. So what's interesting about this is it came not from people who are game developers at all, people who played a lot of games, but they're not game developers at all. It was a very experimental project, and it's kind of interesting, I guess, whether you think this was a failed experiment or a successful experiment, because their idea was, can we take a blockchain and can we make a game that runs on it? And we're not going to be involved in it. We're going to make the game, but we're going to just let it run. Can we build a system where all these people are going to run computers to run our game? In a sustainable way, financially sustainable, rewarded way for them to run that. And this game has been live since 2014 with very little input from the developers. What are the problems with this game? Okay, so because it's based on Bitcoin, it has a very long block time. So this move, so this guy's going to move to here to collect this Hunter Coin, that's the move that the player's made. He can't make another move till the block's closed, so it's going to be 10 minutes. So that's pretty dull as a game. The other problem was the gameplay was so simple. This is a kind of top-down view. Is you basically had these large bot armies coming in. So certainly at the point when Bitcoin prices went through the roof, end of 2017, you could make a lot of money playing this game. So what it boiled down to was two people in Hungary basically built these massive bot armies, and every day were making $10,000, basically going in, wiping everyone else out, and collecting all those Hunter Coins. Even now, people can still make a living, kind of botting these kind of games. So to a degree, the experiment was successful. This game is up and running. It is the kind of least interesting game for a human being to play, really, because you can't collect any Hunter Coins, but there's something there. So in some ways it's a successful experiment, in some ways it failed because the game really wasn't there. Interestingly, these guys now are doing what I mentioned before, the Zaya blockchain game platform, so they're designing from scratch a blockchain that can be used just for making games. Their first games will be coming out at the end of the year, so hopefully they've learnt quite a lot from this experience. A very different game. This was the first blockchain game for mobile. So this is called Spells of Genesis, still on the App Store and Google Play. So you can see it's very different, and actually what these guys do, which is what most people do on mobile for obvious reasons, is they've totally separated gameplay. So this is the gameplay screen here. So you have your 4 characters at the bottom, and it's basically like a kind of pool trajectory game. So you fire up your little spell, and you try and knock out these enemies. The enemies fire down and knock you, turn-based. That gameplay has nothing to do with the blockchain, so that just happens on your phone. It's basically a card kind of collection game in terms of these characters. So you play the levels, you win in-game currency, you win in-game cards, you level up your cards, and then you get to a certain point and you can fuse your cards to the highest level, and then you can go and put that on the blockchain. Now, one of the reasons to do that is there's obviously Apple and Google have well, Apple more than Google, they all have terms and conditions about what you can do on the App Store. So you certainly can't have crypto mining apps on the App Store. You can have crypto wallets on the App Store and Google Play. Games kind of sit in the middle. What most mobile game developers who are looking at this are doing is separating gameplay and making sure they have in-app purchases. So what Google and Apple really seem to care about is people can spend money in the game for an in-game currency and they get their 30% cut, because that's where they make their money. You can bring in blockchain items. So in the case of Spells of Genesis, there is this this kind of companion app here. This is called Book of Orbs, and these are some of the these are some of the cards from Spells of Genesis. So you can within the game you can level up your card, and then you can save it out on the blockchain, and you'll see it in this wallet. You'll see it in the game as well. And then this is the marketplace. So the problem is this was very, say, probably too early as a game. And we can see here there's some of these cards, and there's no sellers and no buyers. There's some with buy and sell prices, but you can't really see here. But it's saying buy at 150 bit crystal, which is the currency they use here, and sell at 14. So there's a massive kind of gap because there's not much liquidity in the market. So it kind of works as a system. People have blockchainized cards. I've done it. It takes forever, actually. It's not very well designed as a game to get you to the level of using the blockchain, but it is there, so it can be done. Again, probably we would see this as probably another failed experiment, but it shows what can be done. So, Cryptokitties. I'm going to spend a bit of time on this. So when I first started writing about blockchain games, I used to use the term Cryptokitties, oh, that's a game. And there is still a debate about whether Cryptokitties is a game, in terms of it is probably it has the least amount of gameplay you can have and still be called a game. So some people will say it's not a game. A few interesting things about Cryptokitties. So it didn't come from game developers, it came from a design studio in Vancouver. It was made to encourage everyone to get involved in blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So their whole thing is the first 1 million people to get into cryptocurrencies. They want their parents, they want their grandparents, they want their kids to be playing this kind of stuff. So this is why I have this cute style, or I always kind of call it a kind of like an ugly, beautiful style. It's not. These are not cute. They're kind of a bit sinister in some ways, but they stand out. They definitely have their own style. The technical aspect of this is actually there was a standard that the Cryptokitties, one of the Cryptokitties technical people created alongside some other people, which basically enabled these cats to be collectible items and be understood on the Ethereum blockchain. I'll talk a little bit about that. But the main reason it was successful is it launched in November 2017, and that's when the cryptocurrency speculative bubble was at its height. So people had a lot of people were putting money into Ether. This thing came along, they thought, well, I'm going to be a millionaire if I buy one of these. So a lot of people bought them at the time, and then the cryptocurrency bubble burst. But it's still actually, what's interesting is this is still the most played blockchain game by quite a long shot. So I spent a bit of time looking at Cryptokitties because I kind of realised that I had kind of used a traditional hardcore gaming perspective to view this game, and that's not how it should be viewed. So let's have a quick look. So this is there are now 1 million Cryptokitties. This is the one they created when the millionth one was born. What's interesting is 97% of those Cryptokitties have been created by the community, so effectively bred by the community. So massively strong community on this game. these were my Cryptokitties in May, earlier in the year, when I didn't really know what I was doing with it. I could argue I still don't, but I basically bought a Cryptokitty, and then I thought, oh, that's interesting, what can I do with it? And then you can breed one, so you can go into the marketplace and breed with someone else's Cryptokitty, pay a bit of money to do that, and then obviously you end up with another one, and then you've got 2 Cryptokitties, and then you go, what can I do with them? And you can breed them. So then you basically just oddly end up just breeding Cryptokitties, and then you get to a certain level and you kind of go, well, okay. My Cryptokitties are rubbish, so you can see this is generation, is kind of an idea of how, not the only reason, but kind of how good they are. So generation 0, those are the best ones. There's one crate every 15 minutes by the developer. They go for about $50, whatever. I didn't spend more than $10 on any of these, and you can see they're really boring. But what happened? These are my Cryptokitties now. So some interesting stuff's gone on here. Difficult to see, but I've actually sold a Cryptokitty. So that was interesting. That happened last week. It wasn't even for sale because they're so rubbish. I didn't bother putting them on for sale. But got an email saying someone wants to buy your Cryptokitty. That's interesting. I lost money on it, but it was interesting that someone wanted it. This one's interesting. So these ones are all this artwork's taken off the main Cryptokitty portal, and it's an interesting kind of aspect of actually this is quite a centralized game in some people's eyes, because all the artwork is not on the blockchain. So if the game server went down, theoretically you wouldn't have any of this artwork, although you could recreate it from the data that is saved in the blockchain. But this one here is a proper Cryptokitty, but I bought this off a secondary site, so I bought this off the Wax marketplace. What's interesting, what they're doing here is to try and make things a bit easier. You probably can't see it at the back here, but here it says purchase price $1.90. So these are all bought in Ether, but this one here, because they're doing a slightly different approach, they've actually got a dollar price in there. I won't go into too much detail about Wax. Wax is very interesting if you're interested in this kind of stuff, but they're kind of having a hybridized blockchain marketplace where you can actually you basically use dollars, really use fiat currency. You can bring in your Wax tokens, but you can't take them out again. This is why this one's shown in black, because it's not being viewed through the Cryptokitties website. So it's a good example of the flexibility that blockchain provides for items. I could obviously exchange this one from the wallet it's in into my Cryptokitties wallet, and then it would look like that. The other interesting thing here, I mean, this won't be interesting in terms of the look, but this one here, Autumn Rain, that just suddenly appeared in my wallet one day. So I was at a conference, had been at a conference about blockchain games, and I had spoken to some people from Cryptokitties. I don't know if that was related, but it just appeared. I've no idea. Someone gifted it to me. I mean, and you can see it's a generation 3, so it's not worth a lot of money, but it was much better than the ones I got. So maybe they took pity on my really bad Cryptokitties and gave me one. I don't know. Well, actually, that reminds me. So we always say to people, if you're interested in blockchain games, the thing you need to do is go and buy a Cryptokitty, because it's not the easiest thing in the world. You have to create an account on something like Coinbase, where you can basically transfer, in your case, euros into Ethereum. Then you have to create an account and something called MetaMask, and then you have to transfer the Ether to MetaMask, and then that acts as your login. But if the first person who does that and emails me, I will give you one of my Cryptokitties. So there'll be a little challenge maybe for you. Okay, so very quickly, the breeding process. So this is how I bred this one here. You can kind of see the characteristics, how it kind of flows through. So it says the tail of this one, what have we got here? The mouth of this one. Get the idea. It does cost money, so cost $1.78, and then there's this interesting thing here, gas fees. So on the Ethereum network, the way it's set up is you have to pay this gas fee. This is basically how keen you are to get this transaction into the next block. So it's a very geeky thing, and you kind of get used to it once you've been messing around with blockchain, but when you first come across it, it seems very odd. Basically, something like this, I'm using this MetaMask wallet here, and it will basically look at what's going on in the Ethereum network, how busy is it, and basically put a gas fee in there. But sometimes your transaction doesn't go through because you haven't spent enough gas, so you have to go back in and edit it and put more in there, and it's a really kind of clumsy way of doing it, because blockchains are created by engineers, I guess. So there are some ways of thinking around that, but this is one of the big challenges, and certainly the guys at Cryptokitties are spending a lot of time trying to make this kind of problem solvable, because sometimes a transaction doesn't go through and you don't really know why. It does take you a lot of time to work it out. So anyway, that's how that goes. So Cryptokitties, again, really good example of having an open kind of blockchain game and how a community picks it up and builds new products. So it's obviously not the first game. There's been lots of games with kind of community third-party services, but this is kind of interesting how those kind of services link into the blockchain and the amount of information that's transparent. So this is the Cryptokitty deck. Just some clever person has come up with this. And this basically, this is just a Cryptokitty I chose, so we can see this is its number. So this is the owner, this is the wallet, the Ethereum wallet that owns that Cryptokitty. We can see when it was born, we can see the block number of it, the Ethereum block number when it was created, there's all this other information. Okay, we can see the gene, so this is kind of crazy, someone has done a genome project on Cryptokitties, and this is the gene. This has all the characteristics. We can see its sale history, and we can see its parents. So the reason people really get into Cryptokitties is because they want to breed certain types. And they look at these kind of attributes, and they look at the DNA, and then they go around trying to find the Cryptokitties they need to breed the ones they want with different characteristics. Obviously, it's a random process. And so in the Cryptokitty deck, you can do... Oh, it's not really showing up very well there. Okay, you can't really see it on the projector, but here you can basically have a drop down on all those DNA channels. So this one here is the pattern of the Cryptokitty, and you can basically create a DNA and then go and search for that Cryptokitty and see if it's for sale. So it's very kind of powerful community tools around it. In terms of this being the biggest blockchain game, kind of how big actually is it? So there's been over a million Cryptokitties have been created. Because blockchain is so open, all this information is fairly easy to kind of pick up. So there's been 450,000 sales, 350,000 unique sales. So we can work out 100,000 or so have been bought and sold more than once. So total sales, this is the total money spent using Ether. It's 50,000 Ether. Obviously, the US dollar value changes day to day depending on what the US dollar to Ethereum averages, but when I did this last week, it's 26 million. So $26 million is a lot of money to some degree, but in the game space, not a lot of money at all. There are mobile games doing that in a month. The average kitty price is $60, but we can see here the medium. So this is the medium is the one that's in the middle in terms of 50% here and 50% there is actually much lower. So we can see there's a lot of cheap Cryptokitties and a lot of expensive ones. So it's a kind of like a fat normal distribution. The most expensive one was 203 Ether. So that was a charity one. At the time, that was $140,000. Now it's only $45,000. But obviously, the guy who bought it paid in Ether. So it's an interesting idea about value here. So did he feel he was getting $140,000 value worth? It was a charity auction, I have to say. This is what it actually looked like. I'll get the name right. So it doesn't look like much. It's called Celestial Cyber Dimension. This was the digital artwork, but because it was a special charity one, they actually created a physical. So it's a PCB board. You can kind of just see the Cryptokitty in there. So this is actually in the museum now. And funnily enough, I actually interviewed the guy who bought this last week, but I didn't know he'd bought it. It was only kind of retrospectively I realised. And he's been into cryptocurrency for a long time. So for him, 203 Ether probably wasn't very much because he probably bought it when it was super cheap, under $1. So it's got an interesting view on value. So the headlines are all about this selling for $140,000. It didn't sell for $140,000. It sold for $140,000 worth of Ether. But for the guy who had it, probably actually cost him, I don't know, $100, maybe $1,000. And he's a blockchain guy anyway, so interesting. So continuing with Cryptokitties and why it's so interesting, there's this idea of the kittyverse. So this is talking about interoperability. So basically taking items from one game and using them in another. So we've kind of argued that Cryptokitties is the least game you can have and still be a game. You can breed in them. You can breed Cryptokitties. That's all you can do. But because it got so successful, lots of other developers started thinking, well, how can we use Cryptokitties in our game? So because a lot of these games at the moment on blockchain use browser-based games and use this MetaMask wallet as like an ID, it's quite easy to see if someone logs into your game using MetaMask. You can just see what's in their wallet. And if you see they have a Cryptokitty, you can say, well, we've got a mini game that you can play with your Cryptokitty. And this kind of developed from kind of a quite small scale to now being something that the developers of Cryptokitty have embraced. They've opened their API so any developers can do it, and they've actually given it this label, the Kittyverse, which is kind of a stamp of approval. So they kind of promote some of these games. Obviously, it's great for them because now you don't just breed your Cryptokitties, you can go into other games and do other things with them. Still fairly limited. So here's 3 that they're promoting at the moment. So the first one was kitty hats. You can go and buy a hat to put on your Cryptokitty. But it's been quite popular. Kitty race is an odd, very blockchain thing where you put your kitties into a race and the one that wins some ether. So kind of it does have a sort of gambling-y type mechanic in there. Obviously there's a battles one as well. But actually there's 48 games in development, or various stages of development, using Cryptokitties. So it's become its own ecosystem, and by far the biggest ecosystem in blockchain. Obviously it's kind of limited, I guess, what you can do with Cryptokitties, certainly aesthetically. But this is the kind of emerging kind of stuff that I think we're seeing that is really interesting, and where innovation is being shown in blockchain games. It just might not be the kind of typical gameplay that we are used to as gamers. Another example, so this is Axie Infinity, which has just gone live today, I think. Uses Ethereum. This is actually created by some hardcore Cryptokitty players who wanted to have a kind of richer experience. So they effectively forked the code, wrote it all themselves. It's a battler game, but you can kind of see, I don't think the artwork's quite so nice, but you can kind of see what they've done in terms of accessibility. So this is this kind of idea of the attributes, the cattributes, or the Axie attributes, I suppose they're called now. Becomes a bit obvious. We can see this one's a ginger colour. It's got the shark gills. It's got the symbiotic Mako fin. So it makes things a little bit obvious. Taking the Cryptokitties kind of idea a step further. Obviously, you can breed them. Okay, so very quickly. Don't want to go into too much technical detail, but it's probably worth at this point just touching on this. This is a term that I really dislike, but it's used a lot in the industry. So we have fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens, and if you want the technical standards, fungible are ERC20 tokens. We think of those as money. So fungible tokens just means that these things are interchangeable. So if I have a 10 euro note and give you my 10 euro note and you give me a 10 euro note, the notes are in some ways individual. I might have written on them, but the value of them is exactly the same. So nothing's really changed. But if you have this Cryptokitty and I have that Cryptokitty and we change them, they might be worth 10 euros, but these are not interchangeable. These are unique items. So most of the work in blockchain games at the moment is being done on this item level using this standard ERC 721, which is spoken about quite a lot. This standard just means the running on the Ethereum blockchain, things like smart contracts know how to handle this in terms of the data. These ones are much more like internal currencies, much more like an in-game currency. But obviously these can be. This is one called Funfair, which is actually a gambling token, but all blockchain tokens can be exchanged out for real money, euros or dollars. So there's some interesting stuff that could be done with these as well, but at the moment the focus is mainly on these. I'm going to skip through that one at the moment. This is just to show the game token value against the US dollar over the last 3 months. Basically bad, but there are, particularly this one up here, is Reality Clash, which is a mobile game, blockchain game coming out fairly soon, and the token value is actually increasing. Okay, so this is OpenSea. I mentioned it a bit before. So OpenSea is a marketplace for these items, these non-fungible tokens. So we can see here, because the blockchain is transparent, basically this just goes and looks at everything running on the Ethereum blockchain in terms of wallets and smart contracts, and it can basically see, so we can see here Cryptokitties, there's over 1 million Cryptokitties. So when the developer said there were over 1 million, we can actually check that there are because someone's done the data. We can also see Cryptokitties is by far and away the biggest game in terms of items. So the next biggest one, Gods Unchained, is 78,000, and then very quickly you're dropping off. So what's interesting here is Gods Unchained is not even out yet, so we'll talk a little bit about that later. But so you kind of have this kind of, it's almost become a speculative game before the game's out. Also interesting is some of these games, CryptoBots, player tokens, these are games that do not have very many players, probably hundreds of players at the most, but they still have a lot of items. So to some degree the blockchain games industry has got a bit hung up on, we have to have loads of items even though we don't have any players. So these items are kind of worthless, even though you may have spent money buying them. And we kind of see, just some of the different artwork. It's a bit of a mess really. So this is, again, talking a bit about transparency. So this is my wallet in OpenSea. So if I log in if I've logged into my MetaMask wallet, it can see what I've got. So obviously it can see my Cryptokitties, so it can see the one I just bred, it can see the one I was given. I've got a whole bunch of cards in here as well from the game that I didn't, just got given those, didn't buy them. We can kind of see here categories, so we can see here already I've kind of building up all these items from games. Most of them not very useful, I have to say. Okay, let's quickly run through some of the games that are kind of coming out fairly soon, or maybe have just come out. So just mentioned Gods Unchained. This is actually very similar in the sense that this was developed by a design company who did a game called Etherbots that was kind of successful earlier in the year, and they kind of understood they needed to kind of ramp up what they were doing in terms of art style. So this now is a very rich kind of artistic kind of style of game. It's kind of certainly the best looking blockchain game we've seen. It's attracted a lot of attention. It's raised over $1 million in terms of selling items before the game's even out. The game won't be out till next year. Also interesting that it's an esport game. So I guess you can see where the inspiration has come from here. So very Hearthstone-like. It's a card trading game. Obviously, card trading games are very popular for blockchain game developers because, in a sense, they're already items we understand. We understand from Magic the Gathering, and we understand from Hearthstone how those kind of economies work. So sticking that on the blockchain, if you have a valuable card, we can kind of see how that is going to be easily understood by players. And the problem I think these games are going to have is it's very, very, very hard to make a card collection game that works well in terms of accessibility and has the very deep meta game. The other problem with blockchain games is, to a degree, they're hard to future-proof. Once you've kind of created cards, they're on the blockchain. You suddenly can't take cards out of the system. I guess you can limit cards in terms of certain tournaments, but it's not like a centralized game where you can just basically remove a card, or you can tweak a card's value. You can't do that with blockchain games. So it'll be very interesting to see whether these guys gain or kind of keep the scale that they've got. And so this is one of their cards here. This one sold for 146 Ether, so a fairly substantial amount. Again, another card-based game, another Hearthstone-inspired game, Zombie Battlegrounds. This is from the guys at Loom Network. Sorry. So Loom Network, as we pointed out before, are actually a kind of a tools company first and foremost. So they're working with Ethereum and building these side chains, so you can run your gameplay on what we call side chains. It's kind of a cut-down version of Ethereum. So the transactions that matter, if you're giving cards away or selling cards, that would go into an Ethereum block, but all the other gameplay would happen what we call off-chain. So it's still running on a blockchain, but doesn't have the same level of kind of security, and has much faster transaction speeds, and doesn't have the problem with gas that we saw with Cryptokitties. So probably not quite so beautiful looking as Gods Unchained. But pretty nice to play. I've been playing the alpha, coming out fairly soon. Interestingly, coming out on mobile first, I think. So a few other types of games. This is one called Hash Rush. So this is actually a PC game to begin with, at least, but very much like the mobile game we saw, Spells of Genesis, has totally separated gameplay from blockchain. So this is, in a sense, a typical kind of strategy game. So you have your little units down here, you're attacking and collecting crystals. It has blockchain items you can use in the game. But effectively how this is going to work is a bit like an esport, that you have tournaments, and the players who are in the top rankings in these tournaments then are given Ether. So the developer actually has an Ether mining outfit. They're based in Estonia. So they're actually kind of rewarding players with cryptocurrency for playing it. That one's coming out next year. Slightly different kind of graphical take. This is Neon District, coming from a US developer. So a very important kind of striking art style. Was going to go down the card-based route, and then realised how hard it was to make a card-based game in general, and certainly on the blockchain. So it's kind of switched back to a more of an RPG approach. This is quite an interesting one. Not quite so good looking actually, but it's actually running in Unreal 4. So it's a PC download game called Cryptic Conjure. So what's interesting about this game is the game designer had an idea for a game, and he's had it for years. And the idea was you had an RPG where you could craft spells, high-powered, very highly powered spells. But then you could share those spells with people or sell those spells. So you craft a spell and it's, say, 200% power. If you give it away, you can give it away or sell it 20 times. Then everyone who has that spell, it would go down to just 100% kind of spell. So that's kind of good for guilds. Obviously, you could have a very high-powered spell and you could give it to your 5 guild members. It wouldn't be 100%, then 200%, then it may be 150%, but you all have a very powerful spell. The interesting mechanic here is if you were going to sell that spell, you could sell a spell and tell someone, well, I'm only going to sell 5 of these. So that means it'll still be quite a powerful spell. But then you could actually sell all 20 variants of that, and you would be reducing that spell for everyone down to 0. So it's pretty much impossible to do that on a centralized database. But on blockchain, it's fairly straightforward. So this is a game, at least that one of the basic mechanics has been, been waiting for blockchain to come along. And when you do talk to people, some game designers and some people who are trying to do blockchain game services, they've had these ideas for a while, and they've only really with blockchain and the kind of decentralized kind of database system that's allowed them to realize those, or attempt to realize them. Obviously, it may not be a very interesting game, but the mechanic is interesting in terms of a game design innovation. Space games, that's Crypto Space Commander, mining. This is an interesting one. So Crypto Baseball, this is got the official Major League Baseball license in the US. This is kind of a kind of collectibles game that feeds into real life. So these are all real life players, and their performance in real life games changes their attributes. It's been fairly successful, although has kind of struggled with a lot of blockchain games in terms of kind of scale. But it's a multi-year license, so they're going to be kind of running this every year in the States for the next couple of years. Okay, Sandbox. So the Sandbox is a well-known mobile game. Done tens of millions of downloads. Started out as a kind of 2D pixel user-generated content product. Has a quite strong community. And now these guys are bringing it into 3D. This is voxel technology. It's very much a Minecraft type approach. So you can create your items using this voxel editor, and then you can. There's obviously a marketplace where you can buy and sell them. You buy and sell these items, then you bring them into your sandbox, and then you can kind of play kind of games within that. Obviously, this plays really well into what blockchain is great at, which is item ownership and kind of trading. Again, quite how it kind of works out as a game. I think this is the challenge for a lot of blockchain games, is you can kind of see very obvious scenarios where it's interesting for people to trade items, but not everyone wants to trade items. So it's kind of getting the balance that fulfills, a strong economy of people creating these items because they're valuable, but also they are valuable because they're useful in terms of gameplay. So Reality Clash, I mentioned that one briefly. Again, a mobile game. This is actually one of the most ambitious kind of games, certainly on mobile. So it's location-based and uses AR and VR and uses blockchain. So it'll be really interesting to see how they manage to pull that one off. Again, has kind of takes the gameplay is a first-person shooter. Doesn't use the blockchain at all. The blockchain is all about these guns. So this is the Armory, which is doesn't run in the mobile game. This runs on the web. So we have these tokens here, so we can see these are guns with skins. So there's an Ethereum skin, there's a Bitcoin skin there, and we see there's like only going to be 30 of those. So there's kind of this idea of scarcity as well. Okay, so let's quickly go through some challenges. So, as I've mentioned before, the games industry is not broken. The games industry is enormous. This is $100 billion of annual revenue globally now, probably over that now. In comparison, the blockchain games sector, in terms of just its funding, the investment is probably about $1 billion, so it's pretty tiny. And even blockchain games hasn't, as a sector, has only had about 5% of total investment in blockchain, which has mainly gone to financial and protocol projects. Blockchain games, I mean, not even anywhere actually close to 100 million, I don't think, but let's say $100 million. So tiny in compared to games. Can we see the little pink dot down there? So blockchain games is, we have to, certainly me as a journalist kind of trying to promote this kind of stuff, have to realise just how small it is. This is not to say this could not start doing billions of dollars and tens of billions of dollars fairly quickly. Certainly in terms of transactional volume with some of these marketplaces, it could work it could explode. And definitely, we've seen that with free-to-play mobile games. So free-to-play mobile games, they took until 2012, and really Clash of Clans came out in the West, and Puzzle & Dragons came out in Japan. They were the first free-to-play mobile games to do $1 billion of revenue in a year. So this kind of stuff can change quickly, but not at the moment. I've mentioned scale a few times. So this is, because everything in blockchain is open, we can kind of see this information. So this is this dApps, distributed apps. This is DAUs by category, so daily active users. So we have exchanges, so token exchanges, people buying and selling different tokens. Games is in green. So we can see here, Cryptokitties launches, end of 2017. And this is the only point at which games are the biggest dApp category by users. So exchanges have always been the biggest. We also see there's a big spike here with Cryptokitties, and then basically we have a little bit around here, but you know, there's a big decline across all categories, but certainly with games. The other thing here is this number here. So that's 22,000 active players, users a day. You know, you'd be laughed at if you had a mobile game with that amount of DAUs. Now, I think that's an unfair comparison, because DAUs for free-to-play mobile games are based around games that are designed to bring people back every day. So you have these very strong compulsion loops. Obviously, in free-to-play mobile games, only 3%, maybe only 2% of people actually spend any money. So with all these games, with Cryptokitties, unless you spend money, you're not playing the game. So probably to get a valid comparison, you're probably timesing this number by 100, maybe even 1,000 to get a broadly comparable estimate at the moment. But even 22 million DAUs there are some mobile games who have that on their own. So the space is not only small, it's actually got a bit smaller than it was back here. I've mentioned MetaMask a few times. So this is the wallet system that most games use at the moment. It's used as an ID system. So it's actually really good. I like it. It's a simple password to put in here. But you have this idea here. If you need to restore your account, you have to import using the account seed phrase. This is something that's really weird. The first time you set up one of these accounts, you're like, what on earth's going on here? What it looks like is something like this. This is not actually from MetaMask. This is from another wallet system. But this is what you do when you're setting up a wallet. And it seems totally bonkers. Backup recovery phrase. These 12 words are the only way to restore your wallet if you forget your password. Please write them down and store them securely offline. So 12 random words there. Do not save recovery phrase on your computer or share it with anyone. So basically, your password, if you forget your password or your computer dies or something, you know, this is the only way you can get your wallet. Thinking about that person who had $1 billion of Bitcoin in his wallet, you know, this is the kind of processes they have to go through. Okay, you have to write it down and print it out. This is bonkers. So what do people do? People print it out, and they have to then go and buy a safe, a fireproof safe, to put it in. I mean, talking to someone the other day, and he goes, well, yeah, my wallet recovery phrase is in my safe, and I have to every couple of months I check my son knows how to open the safe and knows how to get this if anything happens to me, because people have, you know, quite large sums of money. But if for whatever reason you had $1 billion in your wallet and you forgot this, your house burnt down, your paper burnt down, you forgot your password, that's gone. You know, and this is, for most people, this is just absolutely sheer, you know, terrifyingly awful. I mean, the first time I did it was just like, what on earth's going on? So this is a big problem when it comes to scale. And when you talk to people who are doing blockchain games using MetaMask, they basically go, you know, that's the biggest problem in their funnel. So they get people interested in the game. Certainly that baseball game has a lot of coverage in the States. And they can just track how people are interested in the game. They go into MetaMask and they go, what's this? And then they never come back to the game. So it's a big problem for accessibility. You know, this kind of stuff, we all know this. And the first time we did an in-app purchase on mobile, yes, we had to have our credit card in there, but probably we'd use iTunes, so it was kind of set up already. Once you set up MetaMask, it's not so scary. You just put your password in. It's very similar to this, but the process will take time to kind of become normalized, I think, for most people. So another big challenge, I think, is this. So this is the speculative increase of Bitcoin last year. So it peaked out about 19,000, and then has well, now down about 6,000. So yeah, pretty much has collapsed. That's taken a lot of this kind of wind out of the market, certainly in terms of investment. But there's still this crowd. So these guys, these kind of like traders, speculative guys, these are part of blockchain. If you're making a blockchain game, you know, whether you want them or not, these guys are going to be here. There's going to be people trying to work out how they can make money off your game, whether you like it or not. So you need to kind of like it. They can be helpful. They can provide liquidity in the market. They can kind of be useful. But you don't really want to making a game just for those guys. Some people do. You have these kind of Ponzi scheme type games, which are very interesting from game theory point of view. But you probably don't want too many of those guys in your game. We can see here, so this is just a wallet I picked up from OpenSea. No idea who this guy is, but this is Gods Unchained. He has 145 cards from Gods Unchained. So he's obviously spent a bit of money getting those in. He's not doing it, I imagine, because he was going to play the game a lot. He's trying to sell these on. I kind of see sometimes the item marketplace kind of stuff in blockchain games as being a bit like this. I don't know if you have Claire's Accessories in Finland, but it's basically like a shop that has lots of kind of trinkets for girls. And they're all different ones, and if I walk in there, I have no idea, you know, are some of them valuable, some of them not valuable, and I kind of think the item marketplaces are a bit like this. They're all kind of, everything's kind of shiny and pretty, and but how do we work out the value of these things? Obviously, the value of these things is not valuable in of themselves, but they're valuable to people because they like pink, or they like this colour, or you know, the value is created in non-financial ways. And this kind of phrase comes back to me quite a lot. So Oscar Wilde. The price of everything, and certainly in the blockchain games market, we're very focused on the price. What's the ether price of something? How much money did this game raise? But the value aside from financial value, I think we really struggle with. And I think that's something, if you're building blockchain games, you have to focus more on value than price, although obviously you need to make money. Interesting survey. This came out from BitCrystals, who did this Spells of Genesis game quite a few months ago now, but they asked people who are playing Spells of Genesis, have you purchased or traded game items on the blockchain in the past 12 months? Less than half said yes. That's a blockchain game. Granted, it's quite a hard blockchain game to get onto the blockchain, but I was quite surprised about this. And the reason they hadn't done it is I don't have the money. Well, clearly that's not the case. People do have money, but what they don't have is they don't see enough benefits. They don't understand why I would spend money on this item. And second here is too complex and intimidating. So these are the big problems for blockchain games to overcome. Some of that stuff can't be done within games. It's a wider kind of community play. And even actually with MetaMask now, if you're in the States, you can set up an account and buy your ether just with a credit card. We're seeing more of that happening now. Just buying kind of currency with credit cards. I really like this quote. So John Linden, not particularly well known, I guess, outside the games industry, but he worked on Call of Duty games for a long period of time. He then set up this company, Seismic Labs, who did Marvel Strike Force, a free-to-play mobile game using Marvel, and that company has now been bought by Niantic Labs. And he gave this talk in Blockchain Game Helsinki about a month ago, and he was saying games aren't broken, blockchain won't fix them, but gamers want a bigger stake. That's what they want. Gamers are passionate about their games and want to be part of the community. How can we do that? How can blockchain help that? And so he was definitely talking about this kind of blockchain items, give them this idea of stronger ownership. I think that's the kind of low-hanging fruit here. Because anything we do needs to be about community. So we have the speculators, they have their purpose, but they're really to make money for themselves. Community wants the project to be successful. So that's really, when you're building blockchain games, that's what you want to be building, and that's certainly what with Cryptokitties we've seen. How much of that kind of happened inherently for them, how much of that to begin with they kind of kick-started, I don't know, but certainly as they built community, they've spent a lot of time in the community. They spent a lot of time flying around the world talking to their community and doing kind of art projects and charity projects. A lot of mention of scarcity when it comes to item value. Scarcity does not create value. Community creates value for the items. And this is kind of how I kind of see how the market could go. So this is a traditional hockey stick growth curve. So we're here at the moment. So most of the blockchain games are these dApps. So there's over 500 of them, most of them ripping off Cryptokitties. Not very interesting. They're browser-based and MetaMask, which is a problem. So we're probably limited here to about maybe 10,000 DAUs. I think when PC games, well, this is one way it could kind of play out. I'm not predicting this is how it will play out, but this is kind of one way it could play out. So PC, we're seeing now a lot of PC downloadable games, some games using Unity and Unreal 4. I think item trading is definitely where people are expecting a lot of take-up. And esports, personally, I think that will kind of feed in together. So suddenly we could see, like, I've just timed this by 10, obviously it's not any great maths going on here, but I think we can suddenly see, a reasonable growth. The big thing for blockchain games will be this mobile-driven accessibility, just because mobile is a massive audience. 2 billion people playing mobile games. Obviously, the majority won't play blockchain games, but certainly we're looking at kind of millions of DAUs here. And the other thing with mobile games, and we're starting to see it already with the best blockchain games developers who have experience with free-to-play games is we're starting to see free-to-play blockchain games now. So unlike Cryptokitties where you have to pay to get a kitty to even start off, some of these games now you go in and you get a free set of cards or characters to start you off. So we're definitely here at the moment, but I think this can happen quite quickly. So another metaphor, here we are, this is how I see the blockchain games sector, the game developers and the kind of service companies, lots of little tadpoles. You know, the vast majority of these will get eaten, either by each other or bigger predators, but we will end up here, happy little frogs. So I do see, again, going back to free-to-play mobile, you know, we saw it wasn't Rovio who we could argue, you know, won the first mobile, or was the first big successful mobile game company. Rovio wasn't the one to do free-to-play, that was Supercell. I do think we will see some blockchain games companies over the next 5 years become quite sizable, but we will see, you know, blockchain's not going to make EA and Activision and those kind of guys go away. That they will kind of buy the expertise they need. And kind of just summing up, so free-to-play revolutionised mobile games. Lots of people didn't like free-to-play. Lots of game designers hated it and still do. And if blockchain games works, a similar kind of change will happen, but this time it has to be gamer-led. This is partly because how blockchain works. It has to be community-led. If you don't have a community, you don't really have a sustainable economy, and blockchain games are built around that economic system. So what's the challenge and opportunity? So a sweet spot between value, non-financial value and monetization. So they both need to be there. Obviously games companies need to make money. It's expensive making games, but the value you provide doesn't necessarily need to be financial value. So yeah, community, ownership, value and ecosystem are the things I think to think about. And that's me done, thank you very much. So there's my email, I do some YouTube stuff on YouTube, I write on Medium, started a podcast about blockchain games every week, and they're on Twitter. So if there's any questions, that would be great, if you're all still with me.
Is the mic working? It's working, okay. So I'm not going to take the other one. I'll do this, and then Jana will take it to, or maybe we'll throw it. But thank you, Jon, for such an interesting presentation.
Quite a lot packed in there, wasn't it?
I still understand most of the things in there, but I'm very intrigued to try Cryptokitties to kind of understand it more, all the experience of the wallets and all that stuff, that it kind of was the bottleneck for the early phase of the mobile games as well.
I entirely agree. I remember playing my first free-to-play mobile games and thinking, this isn't the game. Yeah. Where's the game?
And also how difficult it was to pay for the games.
Well, I think even for free-to-play, it was the first time you play in a free-to-play game, you're kind of thinking, what am I doing? I'm not like getting an extra level or something. I'm paying for a digital item. What's that? I'm paying for some currency to speed something up. It seemed really alien. And then, if you really like a game, you end up doing it. I think a lot of this kind of stuff becomes psychologically obvious to us after we've done it for a while. So.
You said that the best part of the blockchain technology is the items and then the trading. Mm-hmm. But why is it? Is it like why wouldn't we just be doing that with the traditional currencies? What is the benefit of?
Well, you can't. If you don't have a blockchain, you can't really. It's much harder to kind of show proper ownership. And obviously you can do it, so that there are traditional games that have you kind of trading stuff, but on a centralized server. So if the centralized server goes down, then you've lost everything. The other problem with that kind of stuff is there's lots of issues about having an in-game currency that then you can trade out for fiat currency. So there's legal issues around that, and there's also just really tedious financial transaction issues about that. So if you're going to trade something out, you have to have a bank account. The bank needs to know where that money's coming from. Obviously, quite a lot of people, gamers in the world, are young, might not have a bank account. Certainly in Southeast Asia, you have this unbanked generation. So blockchain solves a lot of the actually quite mundane problems you would have in running a financial system. And there are some kind of wider kind of conceptual issues that it makes it better as well, because you can kind of see who owns stuff, and that, obviously at the moment lots of people do trade Counter-Strike skins and do it on forums, or the whole kind of World of Warcraft stuff where people, can you buy that item off me, and you have to find them in the server and do it, and there's lots of bots and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of clears up a lot of that kind of messy scenario at the moment.
Right. Do we have any questions from the audience? I'm not sure if people are puzzled.
I've confused you all.
More questions. I do have another one. I think that you said that if there is going to be a revolution with blockchain technology, it needs to be community-led. And I would kind of also dare to challenge that.
Please do.
Because I think that the free-to-play was kind of community-led.
Do you?
Because people started not to want to pay for the premium model, but the freemium model. So kind of the why we have the free-to-play model is that people don't want to pay upfront.
Well, yes, no.
Kind of community-led, but it's people-led.
Well, I think with the free-to-play model, what kind of worked, the reason it worked out so well was it basically, the type of gamer you were, you could have a good experience. So if you didn't want to pay any money, like I've been playing Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes now for almost 3 years. I think I've spent $10 or something, you know. I pretty much play it every day. So I've had enormous value in that game. I'm part of an active guild, doing that kind of stuff, you know. But I've not paid any money at all. I had a great experience. There's other people in my guild who spend $300, you know, a week.
Yeah.
Really focusing on certain things. So I get value out of not spending any money at all. There's not even any advertising in there. People who do spend money get a different sort of value.
Yeah.
They kind of feel a little bit superior. They're kind of faster towards their goals of leveling up characters. So there's very different sorts of gamers, and I think you have to give both of them a good experience. Right. So that's why free-to-play has struggled really with pay to win, as that kind of breaks the kind of community between payers and just players. So pay to win is very bad. But I think with blockchain at the moment, the struggle is most of the games you've had to pay to even experience the game. So you have to buy a Cryptokitty to even know if you want to play it. I think as free-to-play comes in, you'll kind of get this nice segregation. But I think the community aspects is a bit deeper, I think, in blockchain, or has the potential to be much deeper because just the way blockchain works is a distributed database. I think you'll have different sorts of communities. And it's just more open, as we saw with Cryptokitties. People can build... The data is much more open in the game. People can build things off it. People can create new games based on it. The developer's not in control the same way. So not every game, not every blockchain game will have great community, but the best ones, I think, like Cryptokitties, will have community that you couldn't really do with non-traditional games.
So is it comparable to kind of a creativity or user-generated content type of games in the traditional?
I think that's a more. Not every blockchain game necessarily will have that, but there's the potential for that in a more open way than you currently have. Because at the moment, obviously. Rightly, I suppose, games companies are very possessive about their IP. So often you have fans trying to recreate games, or trying to recreate games that have gone offline, or try and recreate even kind of fan art and stuff. And suddenly you can get a cease and desist from a lawyer from EA or Activision Blizzard, and these companies are understand their right, the rights they have to protect their IP. It's almost, if you have IP, you have to do that. In blockchain games, you don't have IP in quite the same way, so people have to be much more open. So I think it will be build better communities.
But how do the developer kind of stays in the loop? Will they stay in part of the ecosystem of the game? Well,
this will be the interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, they have certainly have a different role. I mean, in Cryptokitties, to use that example again, obviously Cryptokitties, those guys create new. There are people who can create new kitties. So once you've created a kitty, the community can kind of breed them and do that kind of stuff, but no one else can kind of create them at the moment. So there's still a special role for developers, but it's much more fluid than we've seen before.
So it kind of goes back to the user-generated.
Yeah, and I think that will be certainly something like the sandbox, where we kind of see, lots of people just go, Minecraft's on the blockchain, how could that possibly fail? Obviously there's lots of reasons why something can fail, but that seems a very good use for blockchain technology.
Right. Any questions? Yeah? Okay.
You have to throw them. That's what it's designed for.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you for the interesting lecture. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
So one thing I was thinking about is, like, for blockchains in general, I think it's been really sort of like this blockchain currency focused thing, like we have Bitcoin and Ethereum and stuff like that. And you also talked a lot about, like, in games like this, about items and trade. But do you think that there are other, like, interesting things that you can do with blockchains in game besides just having, like, items that the players trade with each other?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a game designer, so I think at the moment, with the technology being so early, then it seems the most obvious thing for game developers and audiences to get their head around is this ownership model. I definitely think that what Ubisoft have come up with their Hashcraft is probably the most interesting blockchain game. It's not really out yet, and it's really a prototype project. But that's really about user-generated kind of content and more exploration, and I don't think it has items really in the same way. Blockchain game kind of has to have a token really, because that's kind of how they work, or you have to spend tokens in them. So there's no way of getting around that you have to have some sort of over kind of economic system in there that you wouldn't necessarily. But we're saying that, I mean, pretty much every game now has an in-game currency. I mean, I think we've all got used to in-game currencies. It's slightly different if you could actually extract them for euros. So that changes the dynamic a little bit. But I do think, when I talk about kind of communities, I do think we will see. I hope we'll see game designers using blockchain to create games that couldn't be created before. And probably items will probably be part of that. The problem is if you have a very community-led game, it's the developer, how can they make money on these kind of games? It's kind of fundamentally, the developer has to make money in order to create those games in the first place. So there's always that kind of balance. But I do think at the moment we're just seeing very heavy focusing on item marketplaces, because that's kind of where everyone sees the easiest way of making money. But certainly over the next couple of years, I hope we'll see much more interesting game design proposals, but we've not really seen them yet, I have to say.
So I'll take the box back. So we're terribly afraid to throw this mic, even though it's a throw mic. But anyway, so I have another question from a viewer posted previously. So just maybe explain to me why some developers are worried about sustainability, like ecological issues of the blockchain technology.
I don't think many developers are actually, but I've had a few people in the industry, and it is about, at the moment, the biggest blockchains are Bitcoin and Ethereum, and both of them use this proof of work scenario where effectively you have enormous amounts of computers doing these very complicated calculations to run a block. And I mean, there's different stats thrown around. I think the last one was it uses as much electricity as Belgium or something. Bitcoin uses as much electricity as Belgium does in a year, and that's kind of increasing over time. So there clearly are. There's lots of other ecological issues in the world, I suppose, but I guess some people could say, well, using all this computing power and giving out all this CO2 just to create another currency which we don't really need would be a bad thing. I'm not going to really get into that ecological argument. There's lots of things we do which are bad,
Is there any way that the blockchain technologies could improve in that way?
So Ethereum is moving from this proof of work model where you have to have these big computers doing these big calculations to this proof of stake. That won't happen for another 2 years. But basically, all the new blockchains use this other model. So they still use energy, but they don't use it in the same intensive way. So the industry going forward is not. You won't suddenly have lots of Bitcoin-type blockchains being produced and it becoming ecologically unsustainable from that point of view. Which is not to say that should we be spending all this electricity mining Bitcoin, but it's kind of a legacy issue now. So going forward, I guess it's a bit like any technology starts off and the cars are horrible and belching out loads of fumes, and then we get to electric cars at some point. The same thing will happen. So I think people are aware of ecological issues, but it's not a prime concern anymore.
It's out of our eyes, so that's kind of easy not to think about it. And you're right, developers don't necessarily think about the sustainability issues, but at least in Finland, which has recently have been talking about that we have this huge impact that we could use for also improving our ecological things in the world. So I think it's one of the things.
It is actually quite interesting that so you're seeing a lot in most of the Bitcoin mining happens in China, and Bitcoin isn't used for games at all, so it's just the financial side. But you're seeing in Iceland, which has obviously very green electricity with geothermal stuff, a lot of Bitcoin mining or Ethereum mining is now happening in Iceland. In fact, they have so many people trying to set up servers there that they've had to basically just stop it because it's got ridiculous that everyone wants to set up in Iceland. I mean, there's one I was reading about, I can't remember if it was in Finland or Norway. There was some up in the north of the country who was some guys setting up a big kind of mining operation up there as well, because it was, I think, hydrothermal kind of stuff.
Right.
So you can do it ecologically, I suppose, or more ecologically than running a big coal-powered fire station.
All technologies kind of have to take into that issue as well. Any more questions? Design, environment, technology?
Is anyone desperate to rush out and play a blockchain game? I guess that's the takeaway. Where you'll just like, no, my criticisms were not confounded by the speaker.
So there isn't too much game yet, but
there's loads of games.
Coming.
There's loads of bad.
In the game.
Yeah, yes, no, it definitely is coming. But as I say, you know, it's probably only really a year. The blockchain games sector is really only a year in terms of history, and because the games industry hasn't really got involved in it until the last kind of few months, we've kind of seen people who haven't made games before making their first game, and that's never good, whether you're on a blockchain or not on a blockchain. But there's definitely interesting stuff happening next year.
Thank you for your presentation, and we are eager to look forward what happens in this field.
We'll come back next year.
Next year we can have another reflection. So, my name is Anna-Kaisa Kultima, and this was Games Now. Thanks for watching here on the lecture room, but also for the people on the stream. Make sure that you follow the YouTube channel, Facebook page to get best out of this course. And next month we're going to talk about idle games. That might be one of the things that could also utilize.
There are some idle games on blockchain, yeah.
The blockchain technology. So come back and tune in for the next session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.